Good evening, travelers of the strange. Let me ask you straight. If a court summons named a ghost as your witness, would you show up early or run the other way? Take a seat by the aisle, keep your heartbeat steady. You're listening to Somnolent Conspiracies, where we greet you properly, invite you to think with us, and walk that thin edge where evidence and the inexplicable brush sleeves. Tonight we're in Boston, a city that files its history in brick and keeps its sins in the basements. A homicide trial is about to start. A developer is accused of killing a preservation activist who stood in the way of a luxury project. The defense has a surprise, calling Father Gabriel Quinn, a parish priest, as a witness for the prosecution's timeline. Not because he heard a confession, because he says the victim appeared to him, whispered a name, and led him, step by step, through the locked nave to a hidden reliquary where a phone recorded her last minutes. The judge didn't strike it. Massachusetts law allows a priest to speak about phenomena that led him to physical evidence, so long as no sacramental seal is broken. Our investigator is no theologian. She believes in door logs, in why candles gutter against drafts, and in how a grieving mind invents patterns. She also believes, reluctantly, that some rooms remember. We'll map a church where the floor lists a little to the east, check how a phone lights when a hand isn't there, and follow a trail of plaster dust from a charnel niche to the defendant's car. We'll let a priest speak, and then test every consequence of his words. Ready? Court is in session. If the air turns cold, note the time, not your fear. Part 1, Summons and Shock. The ceiling fans in Suffolk Superior Court turned with that sleepy, persistent whir that makes even felony charges sound like housekeeping. Fluorescent tubes hummed. Counsel shuffled paper as if the verdict could be sorted into the right stack by hand. Detective Maeve Donnelly sat 3 rows from the bar, notepad on her knee, pen uncapped and idle. She'd come for pretrial motions, not theater. Boston liked to pretend the two were different. On the docket, Commonwealth versus Ethan Vale. Vale, the developer with impeccable teeth and a taste for brick facades glued to glass, stood accused of murdering Clara Doyle, the preservation activist who kept showing up at zoning meetings with photographs, citations, and a voice that did not tremble. The city had decided, predictably, to take sides in print. The tabloids wanted a crusader saint. The broadsheets wanted a parable about capital. Maeve wanted the dull comfort of a chain of custody that didn't squeak. When Judge Colleen Hartnett took the bench, the room rose like a single, reluctant organism and sat again. Hartnett looked as if she'd been born in the robe and had merely grown into the sleeves. Pre-trial counsel, she said. Let's keep it crisp. Defense stood. Arthur Kellner. Gray suit, gray eyes, a habit of smiling with only half his mouth, so the jury would think he was saving the other half for them. Your Honor, he began. We intend to call a witness whose experience is relevant to the discovery of physical evidence central to the Commonwealth's case. Maeve glanced at her notes. They'd expected motions to limit a recording, to exclude certain photographs. Not this, Kellner continued, savoring the turn. Father Gabriel Quinn, pastor of St. Cormac's. A small stir, then the thicker kind of noise that isn't sound so much as air adjusting to a surprise. Cameras, unofficial, hidden as pens and tie clips, tilted. Maeve felt the bench plank under her thighs as if it had become narrower. Assistant District Attorney Sarah Levine rose, arms close to her body. Your Honor, the Commonwealth objects on the ground of relevance if the defense proposes to introduce religious opinion. Kellner put on his half-smile. We propose to introduce no doctrine at all. Merely the sequence of events that led Father Quinn to locate a cellular phone within his church in the early morning hours of March 21st. The same phone the Commonwealth seeks to authenticate under business records and metadata. Judge Hartnett steepled her fingers. Father Quinn found the victim's phone? Kellner. Yes, Your Honor. Levine. The Commonwealth is aware Father Quinn turned over a phone. We contest the necessity of coloring the discovery with speculative narratives. Speculative? Kellner asked mildly. He heard a word. He felt a draft. He opened a sealed niche and found a device that, once charged, contained a 45-minute recording of Ms. Doyle alive in a parking garage, in proximity to persons of interest. There it was, Maeve thought, the word heard used like a match. She noted it, circled it once, left the pen hovering. Judge Hartnett looked down, then up. Counsel, approach. They did. The murmur at the bench was low and unintelligible. The public gallery leaned forward as one body. Vale sat perfectly still, gaze lowered, jaw set. Men who build towers often understand posture. Maeve let herself remember the call-out that had started this whole vector of strangeness. A parish priest at 2 in the morning, pale and furious, telling the watch commander he had found something in the transept wall that did not belong to any saint. She remembered too the sacristy smell, the wet plaster and a sweetness like old lilies, and beneath it the acrid bite of electronics gone suddenly warm. She'd stood with gloved hands while Sisu bagged the phone, marked the linen, taped the niche edges for particulates. She'd watched Father Quinn step back to the nave and press his fingers into his collar as if the starched fabric had narrowed. Now the judge's bench conference concluded. Hartnett faced the room. I will allow Father Quinn's testimony insofar as it relates to the discovery of physical evidence, she said. He may describe actions taken, locations, times, and observations of a non-doctrinal nature. He will not testify to sacramental communications or divine causation. If anyone says miracle in my courtroom, they'd better be talking about a clean chain of custody. Laughter, quick and nervous, broke and died. A reporter scribbled in the aisle. Maeve wrote, Quinn allowed scope limited, actions/observations only. She underlined actions. Kellner nodded as if a plan he'd made in pencil had just been inked. Thank you, Your Honor. The defense is satisfied. Good, Hartnett said. Next issue, motions regarding the garage audio. But the room did not settle. It did what rooms do when a word like priest is attached to evidence. It turned the air down 2 degrees and waited for a draft. Maeve breathed shallow to keep her mind quick. This case had already swallowed 2 weekends and a funeral's worth of black clothing. She did not intend to surrender procedure to spectacle. She studied Ethan Vale again. Real estate had taught him the trick of emptiness. His expression revealed nothing, but Maeve had learned to look at hands. Vale's fingers were still. No tapping, no worrying at the cuff. Not innocence, not even confidence. Just a man who had practiced holding still until people mistook it for repose. When the garage audio came up, ADA Levine argued foundation briskly, citing make and model, battery drain logs, the charging session at CSU, the hash values on the memo file. Kellner pressed on chain of custody timing between the sacristy and the evidence locker. Hartnett split the difference with rulings that let both sides think they'd won something today and would lose something tomorrow. During a recess, the press did their circling. They had the flop sweat of people who needed adjectives. Ghost phone, someone said with relish, rehearsing a headline. Priest witness, said another, leashing a narrative to a profession like reporters always do. Maeve kept her badge bluntly visible and her face uninteresting. She answered nothing. Levine drifted over as if accidentally. You'll want to re-interview him, she said softly. I will, Maeve said. But within the lines the judge just painted. Paint them again if you must, Levine replied. He's sincere. They usually are, Maeve said. It helps them survive what they've seen. At counsel table, Kellner leaned toward Vale and spoke without moving his lips. Puppeteer minimal. Vale gave the ghost of a nod. It would play well for those who wanted to see discipline. It would read badly to those who had already decided his control was the kind men learn when they've had to hold a body still. Court resumed. Dates were set. Subpoenas were acknowledged like weather. The fans turned above, insistent. When Hartnett finally said, "We are adjourned," the room exhaled and stood and streamed toward the corridor where the city noise waited to fold them back into ordinary air. Outside, on the granite steps, microphones lifted like a field of iron weeds. Maeve avoided them and took the side exit onto Pemberton Square, walking into a wind that held the smell of distant salt. A press van's generator rattled like a bad conscience. She passed it and kept going, head down, as if the city were keeping a secret in the seam of its coat and she intended to find the seam. The text buzzed. Sergeant Klein. You hear? Judge let the caller talk. Limit scope. Asterisk asterisk. Maeve, I heard. I was there. Asterisk asterisk. Klein. You believe him? Maeve paused at the corner and watched a woman try to light a cigarette against the wind with stubborn, cupped hands. I believe in routers and dust, she typed. Belief can come later, or not at all. Asterisk asterisk. She put the phone away and let the case arrange itself again in her head. Clara Doyle, late meeting, bicycle reflector cracked near a tire stop. A waterfront garage where the night breathed in whistles that kept time like a patient metronome. A phone found not where phones are kept but where bones are named. A priest who had felt cold air slide along his shins and had followed it into the wall because he thought a house of God should not be colder for lies. Maeve turned south toward the north end. The neighborhood pressed close, brick on brick, iron balconies like notation on a staff. She knew St. Cormac's by feel if not by faith. The nave leaned a little east, as if listening to the harbor. The transept held a niche that had once opened onto relics and now opened onto a procedural headache. If Father Gabriel Quinn was going to speak under oath, she would need him to speak first to her. Plainly, cleanly, within the contours a court would accept. No candles, no incense, just keys, a door log, and the scrape of something metal behind plaster. The press followed her for half a block and gave up. She let the city's afternoon thicken around her until the courthouse had become a redoubt behind her shoulder. Traffic noise rose and fell. Somewhere a church bell tested its clapper with a single exploratory toll. In another case, in another year, she might have called it atmosphere. Here it was a clock. She put her hands in her coat pockets and felt the small, smooth bulk of the evidence locker key fob warm from her palm. Actions, Judge Hartnett had said. Observations. Maeve had always preferred those to theories. She would go to the parish next. She would ask Father Quinn to walk her, minute by minute, from the moment his keycard pinged the reader at 2:13 a.m. to the moment he laid a dead woman's phone in living hands. The wind shifted, carrying the faint iodine tang of the harbor up Hanover Street. Maeve tasted salt, swallowed, and started walking. Part 2. The church at 2:13 a.m. St. Cormac's looked older at night. Stone that felt merely historical in daylight became something closer to bone under Sodium Street glow. Maeve stood beneath the vestibule lantern while Sergeant Klein signed the log with the parish night warden. The book was the old kind, lined paper and a ballpoint whose cap had chew marks, beside a modern swipe reader set into oak as if it were a confession box for silicon. Keycard audit? Maeve asked. The warden, a tired man with a face like a folded map, nodded toward the rectory office. Father's waiting. He made coffee, strong as sin. They found Father Gabriel Quinn at a narrow desk with a stack of parish bulletins and a laptop open to the security dashboard. He rose, collar straight, sleeves pushed up as if to argue with plumbing. His hands were big, workman's hands. There was plaster dust in the creases, like flour. He looked as if sleep had tried him and he had declined politely. Detective Donnelly, he said. No theatrics, no tremor. Sergeant Klein, thank you for coming. We'll need a clean copy of your access logs. CCTV pulls for the nave and transept covering midnight to 3 a.m. on the 21st. And any audio you have from live mics left on, Maeve said. I'm told your choir likes to forget their switch. They do, Quinn said and turned the laptop. The parish vendor's interface was clumsy but honest. Timestamps stacked like rail ties, each marked with a little green tick or a frowning red circle for denied entries. The cursor moved. There, 2:13 and 12 seconds. My card. Any other pings inside that window? Maeve asked. Quinn's scroll rolled, the soft whir of the mouse loud in the night office. No one else in or out between 12:53 and 4:02. I checked before I called you that night. I've checked several times since. Maeve watched the line of his jaw as he said it. Show me the footage. They clicked through camera tiles. Grainy vestibule, albeit bright enough to map a face. The nave with its central aisle like a pale river. The south transept where a small statue of a martyr stared over the niche that had become a problem. The clocks agreed. 2 hours, 13 minutes and 12 seconds. A door swing. A figure in black stepping into the vestibule shadows. Head bowed because habit teaches reverence better than signs do. Quinn on the screen moved down the aisle with careful steps, habitually counting pews, Maeve guessed, as priests sometimes do. At 2 hours, 13 minutes, and 48 seconds, he paused. The nave camera, fixed and high, caught no whisper, only a shift in posture as if something had crossed his feet. What happened there? Maeve asked. Quinn didn't take his eyes off the screen. Cold. The kind that presses on the ankles and creeps into the boards. Not a draft. A presence that moved. Presence is a church word, Maeve said evenly. We'll need a building word. He inclined his head without offense. Then call it a flow. A river of cold air that ran down the aisle and stood at the transept wall where the niche is sealed. Klein snorted softly, not derisive, exactly. More a tired man's acknowledgement that the world keeps handing him things that ruin his coffee. Maeve pointed. There. The turn. On camera, Quinn peeled left into the transept. He put his palm to the wall as if for heat, then for hollowness. The nave cam gave them nothing but a shoulder blade under black cloth and the glint of an altar lamp. But the transept cam, angled from the choir loft, had caught the rest. The priest kneeling, fingers running the edge line of a plaster rectangle whose paint was one shade duller than the surrounding wall. A small metal sound. Then another. Chronicle what you did, Maeve said. I put my ear to the seam and heard. Not a voice. A suggestion. One word, very clear in my head. Adoremus. He held up a placating hand before she could answer. I know, Latin, but there's a reason beyond the liturgical. We'll get there. Actions, Maeve said. He nodded. Actions. I fetched the sacristy kit. A plaster knife, a chisel with tape around the bite, blue shop towels. I knew I would have to put it back somehow. I didn't want to break the face too badly. I scored the edges. There's a hairline from a previous repair, 1968, when we moved a reliquary. It gives a man a line to favor. When I cut, I smelled gypsum and dust that wasn't as old as it should have been. The transept camera saw him work. The knife moved. A rectangle loosened, tugged out like a slow tooth. Then the scrape, forensic, unmistakable, of something metal sliding on stone behind plaster, captured not by the camera but by another accident of modernity. Audio, Maeve said, and Quinn clicked a different window. The choir mic, left live after a rehearsal, had recorded a room tone that sounded like sleep, soft electric hum. The chapel's old lungs breathing through vents, the whisper quiet of an urban night. Then, the steady step of shoes on tile, Quinn's breath going shorter, the faint rasp of tool on wall, and at 2 hours 23 minutes and 11 seconds, the sound that would later be played for the court. A latch, somewhere inside the niche carcass, touching metal and then sliding off. Behind it, very softly, a single human word. Adoremus. The audio offered, featherlight, nowhere and everywhere at once. Klein looked at the ceiling as if to ask it to behave. Maeve said nothing. She let the recording play. After the word, there was silence for 2 beats, then the sigh of compromised plaster and the soft fold of fabric being eased out of a recess. On the screen, Father Quinn turned with something in his arms wrapped in white. He set it on the transept shelf as if it could bruise. The camera did its best. It gave them corners and hands and the profile of a rectangular bundle the size of a book. What did you find? Maeve asked, though she knew. The phone, Quinn said, wrapped in an altar cloth. Linen from the Tuesday set. It was cold as a fish. Dead battery. There was a trace on the cloth, gray. And glass grit like the glitter that sits in drywall compound. We'll sample the towel and the niche face, Maeve said. We'll need that cloth. It's sealed and bagged, Quinn said. As you instructed that night. They replayed the next minutes in miniature. Quinn walking, careful, to the sacristy. The sacristy camera taking over and showing him set the bundle on a stainless steel counter next to cruet racks and a bottle of ordinary dish soap. He unwrapped the cloth, revealing a phone with a cracked corner, screen black, case scuffed and slick with the fine powder of gypsum. His fingers did not leave prints. The blue nitrile gloves he donned were visible on the edge of frame. He reached for a charging cable in a drawer of assorted adapters, parishes like police stations, collect every plug a community forgets. And he tried ports until one seated. He did not turn the phone on. He stood back and looked at it like a live thing. And then, Maeve asked. I called the watch commander, Quinn said simply. I told him I had an item in need of immediate custody. I told him where it came from and how I'd handled it. If I had done wrong, I wanted to do the rest right. Show me the router logs, Maeve said. Quinn blinked once. You'll want those because of the word. Because words mean many things when they're also network names, Maeve said. He brought up the admin page. St. Cormac's Wi-Fi SSID. A dormice? Accented in a way that made parishioners ask for the sticky note with the code. On the night in question, the router had registered a device association at 2 hours 12 minutes and 31 seconds, 40 seconds before Quinn's keycard ping, with a MAC address that Maeve didn't recognize but that felt prickly with familiarity. We'll pull it, she said. Cross with known devices. Quinn tapped a folder. I printed the association table that morning. The sexton likes to name his phone Rourke Van, as if he were giving it a collar. The MAC on the log matches the one he wrote on a post-it so he could brag about getting onto the secure network from the parking lot. I know the post-it, detective. I taped it back to his toolbox where it belongs, twice. Maeve let the name settle. Paul Rourke, maintenance man with keys to both church and garage world. A man whose hands had lines where lime had eaten skin. The beat list in her head ticked forward of its own accord. Play the rest, she said. The choir mic had captured a little more. Quinn on the phone, voice low. Footsteps approaching. The watch commander's first unit arriving at 2:34. The bureaucratic ballet of gloves and bags and numbers. Close enough to hear, on the sacristy sink metal, the curious grit of slurry that CSU would later microscope and find threaded with reflective flakes. Silica glass from a type of wallboard favored in parking structures where signage needs to bounce light. They stood in the rectory office and listened to time pass in a room already emptied of that moment. Maeve found the tiny, stubborn place in herself where skepticism lives and set it down, not out of belief but in favor of the only thing that mattered more than belief. The phone. The slab of glass and silicon, now clean, copied, hashed, and stored in a place whose locks had camera eyes of their own. The 45-minute voice memo the lab had pulled from its pocked storage. Clara Doyle's voice, crisp with anger and breath, a man whose voice stayed out of the frame by luck or by design, and the background punctuation, the reversing beeper, the gulls at low tide, the foghorn counting time for the harbor, and a whistle in the ventilation that rose every 14 seconds like the lift of a sleepwalker's chest. Father, Maeve said, you mentioned a reason Adoremus might be more than liturgical. He nodded toward the transept camera's static view, where a sliver of a wall-mounted sheet could be seen, half-cropped. The youth group asked me to post the Wi-Fi name and password near the router. I told them I hated the idea of our nave being a coffee shop. They told me evangelization happens where the bars are. We compromised. The sign is there. If Ms. Doyle ever wrote Latin hymn titles in her emails, and she did, it would also be a hint to anyone who knew the church that Adoremus marks where the signal is strongest. By the transept. By the niche. Maeve looked again at the video still. The priest in black, bent over a square of wall, the world watching him from a machine eye he did not look up to acknowledge. So the word could have been an old reflex, she said, or a person's whisper, or a prompted memory. Either way, it put your hands on that scene. Either way, Quinn agreed. Hands on plaster, not on mystery. Klein cleared his throat. We done with the sacred tour? We are, Maeve said. She asked the warden for the physical logs and signed for the CCTV export. Quinn handed over a bagged altar cloth and the printed router associations, each initialed along the tape. The priest's handwriting was tidy and spare, the sort of script men use when they have long practice writing names of the dead. At the transept, she walked the path Quinn had taken that night. She stood where he had felt the cold, but the air now was merely night air, faintly metallic with radiator breath. The niche had been patched the day after CSU finished their swabs, an honest square of wet plaster troweled smooth, waiting for paint. The church smelled like stone forgiven of noise. Maeve pressed her palm flat to the new surface. It gave nothing back but cool. She would ask facilities about drafts. She would ask an HVAC tech about pressure differentials when a boiler cycles at 2 in the morning. She would request sound tests from CSU to match the choir mix noise signature to vent registers. She would not write ghost anywhere. She never had. Back in the rectory office, she signed for the evidence transfer. Quinn looked at the forms as if they were sacraments with barcodes. "If you find out who put that phone there," he said, "tell me the hour you learned it. I would like to know if I was awake by accident." "Nothing about this feels accidental," Maeve said, "but we'll keep the accidents honest." They stepped out into the corridor. The church lights dimmed to their nighttime modesty. Somewhere in the north wall, a pipe ticked as it cooled. Old buildings speak in syllables you learn if you listen. Maeve listened and heard only the ordinary language of wood and water and air. She was relieved by its ordinariness. Outside, the harbor wind cut through Hanover Street, turning paper cups into small, noisy ghosts. Maeve pulled her coat close and watched Klein carry the bagged altar cloth to the cruiser as if it might spill a secret on his shoes. She thought of the phone and the voice memo in its gut, and the way the whistle in the ventilation made itself a metronome for fear. It was procedural work now. Triangulate the sound, match the horn table, narrow the garage. She made a note in the margin of her pad. Phone equals center. Who hid it in church? Asterisk asterisk then. Below it, Rourke, Mac at 212. Keys to both worlds. Asterisk asterisk, she circled the second line. The circle wasn't an answer. It was a door. She shut her notebook and got in the car. The harbor foghorn spoke once, long and tired, and then quieted, as if the bay had given a testimony of its own and now would wait for cross-examination. Part 3, the voice in the garage. The phone woke up like a diver breaking surface. Screen bright, a smear of battery red. Then the home screen with Clara Doyle's camera roll grayed out by grief. CSU had mirrored the device and given Maeve the copy to work from. She sat in the AV lab with headphones on, the kind that clamp your head until it thinks better of wandering, and press play. Clara's voice filled the world between Maeve's ears. Breath quick but not panicked. Words measured the way people who've dealt with men in suits learn to measure words. "I told you, Ethan," Clara said. "You can't knock out fire stops without permitting. The city will shut you down." The reply was a shape without edges, male, low, the consonants blurred by a pocket or the way the phone pressed against cloth. The words weren't clean, but the attitude came through like a stain. "Don't. Stop. Who do you think you are?" In the background came the punctuation. The slow pulse of a ventilation unit inhaling and exhaling. A reversing beeper somewhere below the conversation's register. Gulls, a foghorn cupping the air with a long, patient sound you feel under your ribs more than you hear. None of that was Boston generic, it was Boston particular. Maeve hit space and looked at the lab's wall clock. 14 seconds. She scrolled the waveform, marked the first vent whistle rise, then counted to the next. 14 again, like a metronome kept by a machine with lungs. Klein leaned in the doorway with a coffee that smelled like it had been brewed out of habit rather than hope. "How bad?" "Useful," Maeve said. "Listen." She rolled back and let it play. Clara again. "Ethan." Pure and twice in 4 minutes, like a signal flare. The fabric rattle of a tarp. The slap of wedge blocks being worried against wool chocks. The skid of something heavy being edged along smooth concrete. Then, hard to ignore, the sound of a hand brushing the phone, muffling the world for a breath and letting it up again. "Waterfront," Klein said when the foghorn spoke. "That's not the inner harbor. Battery Wharf, maybe. Could be Conley." "Conley's horn is lower," Maeve said. "Different pattern. And listen to the gulls, they're close. That suggests a wharf face, not a container yard." Klein wagged his cup. "And the whistle? Ventilation. A grate above or near the mic. There's a note in it, like a flute with a bad reed. It rises for 2, falls for 12. 14-second cycle. Not many places with that exact whine. Fewer when you cross with building permits for late-night work on the 21st, Maeve said, already pulling up the city portal. And fewer than that when you add subcontractor contracts that cross Ethan Vale's companies. The clerk at the Inspectional Services Department had a voice like a lined ledger. Maeve showed her a badge and a smile that said, "I will not waste your time." They pulled records, overnight access requests, noise variances, parking bay closures. Battery Wharf had a permit filed by Marina Cobb's management firm for after-hours drywall repair adjacent to loading area. Initials PR in the corner. Paul Rourke's initials, or a coincidence that would get a coincidences day in court. Security, Maeve asked. Private contractor, the clerk said. Cameras feed to a lobby console and a remote server if someone remembered to plug it in. Depends on the day. Maeve and Klein went down to the wharf. The harbor shrugged a shoulder of wind and let fall the smell of salt and diesel. Battery Wharf's concierge had the smooth patience of a man paid to be unstartled. He unstartledly told them their management office could authorize footage pulls. Maeve unpocketed a court order that had anticipated a lack of enthusiasm. The loading bay felt like a stage after the show. Mop buckets, a ladder folded like a broken insect, yellow paint on concrete that insisted lines mattered even where no one was watching. Above the janitor's closet, a vent breathed. When the blower came on, the register sang, a thin rise and then a soft decay. Maeve checked her watch. 14 seconds to the next. There, Klein said softly. Your flute. We'll need to match timbre, not just tempo, Maeve said. But yes. A reversing beeper complained in the garage proper as a delivery van backed toward the freight elevator. The sound bounced off concrete and came back as a longer version of itself, exactly as it had on Clara's recording. Maeve stood where she thought the phone might have been, near a post stenciled with load limits, and raised her head toward the vent. The whistle pressed into her ear like a sustained breath that someone had forgotten to let out. Back in the lobby alcove, they watched the sub-basement feeds from midnight to 2 that night. Security cameras are liars who tell the truth shyly. The resolution left faces at guessing distance, but shape tells its own story. A man with Rourke's build and walk, one shoulder a little high, left foot turned 2 degrees outward like a memory of an old sprain. Passed the janitor's closet twice with a blue towel in his back pocket. At 0:57, he opened the closet door with a key on a retractable belt chain. The door's edge caught a wedge block. He put it in his pocket. At 1:09 a.m., second figure entered the bay, cap low, jacket zipped. The camera couldn't do her face, but it did her hair. Clara's bun, messy, the way you pin it when your hands are impatient. The audio didn't exist on the garage feeds, but Maeve's headphones filled the silence with Clara's copy. Ethan, she said again, and the male voice made a shape that could be anger or cold or both. The tarp's breath, the chalk's bounce, the scrape, then a scuffle, foreground by the phone being jostled. Then location noise again, emptier. The memo ran on, long minutes of fan and horn and the ordinary, mean noises of a space that had been asked to keep a secret. In the sub-basement footage, the second figure left by 1:22. The first, Rourke-shaped, remained. He moved tools. He stood under the vent for too long, perhaps to breathe something that wasn't what had just happened. Then he was gone too. At 2:03, the camera on the waterfront door flickered as if an electrician had sneezed. At 2:07, the loading bay cam caught the tail of a van exit, Rourke's company logo on the quarter panel. At 2:26 a.m., side entrance cam 2 blocks away picked up a hooded figure with a bundle. At 2:27, the church vestibule cam showed no one. At 2:28, a taxi crossed Hanover. 2:31, nothing. Battery pulls? Klein asked. CSU has them, Maeve said. Phone battery was dead at recovery, but usage logs show the recording stopped at 12:15 and the last screen on at 12:16. After that, dark until the sacristy charger. That gives us a window. 11:05 to 12:15 for TOD, plus liminal handling afterward. Maeve nodded, listening again to the memo's final third. After the scuffle, after the small, animal noises that make cops older, the track settled into long silence broken only by mechanical breath. Twice in that long silence, the phone was lifted, once for 6 seconds, once for 2. The second lift aligned with the faint jingle of keys. She logged the timestamps. Trace the horn, Klein asked. I want it pinned, Maeve said. She pulled up the Coast Guard's fog signal tables. Battery Wharf fell in the acoustic shadow of a particular aid to navigation that had a pattern of 1 5-second blast every 30. The memo's horn sang at roughly that cadence, depending on the night's temperature and the distance of low clouds. She marked 3 events and their intervals. They matched. She walked the loading bay again and let the space talk. The way sound pooled under the vent, the way gulls braided their cries with the horn so you could chart where water met concrete by ear alone. Procedural thinking is a kind of faith that asks nothing of heaven. You make your creed out of cycles, frequencies, the dumb honesty of machines. She found the janitor's closet that had sung to her in the audio. Locked. The concierge, made of policies and smiles, came down with a ring that looked like the Tower of London. "We keep it for maintenance only," he said. "Your maintenance includes Paul Rourke?" Maeve asked. "On contract," the concierge said, blandly unaware of the way names can tilt the floor. Inside the closet, the smell of bleach had to fight with the smell of damp dust. A tarp folded on the top shelf had a corner printed with Vale's contractor logo. On the floor sat wedge blocks, their edges scuffed, and a coil of blue shop towels like a small sea. Above, the vent mouth, slatted, dust-furred, and ready to sing. Maeve took photographs in the boring, perfect way evidence likes. CSU would do the rest with swabs and tape and light. When she stepped back into the bay, her headphones still hung around her neck. The memo had finished and the player sat at 45:02 with a polite square button waiting to be pressed again. She thumbed it back to minute 8 and listened once more to Clara say the name. "Ethan," Clara said, each time more an indictment than a plea. On the valet monitor, a feed from the front drive showed a black sedan gliding up to the lobby. Ethan Vale stepped out, tie immutable, jaw angle set for cameras he assumed would always be near. He spoke to the concierge and pointed down the corridor that led towards the bay as if he owned all corridors by default. "Speak of the devil," Klein muttered. Maeve removed the headphones and let them fall against her chest. She looked toward the vent, toward the closet, toward the camera that had lied shyly and still told her what she needed to know. Then she looked toward the lobby where Vale's reflection cut itself on the marble like a second man following the first. "Battery Wharf," she said, "more to the room than anyone. That's our garage." She didn't say the rest out loud. That a phone had learned a building's language and repeated it back to her. That a priest had learned to translate cold into action. That names spoken in the dark have a way of finding microphones. She only wrote it down in a hand as tidy as Quinn's. Garage located. Path from bay to niche is real. Find who carried the phone across that distance and why. Asterisk asterisk. Part 4, Stone, Dust, and Ash. Stone keeps bad secrets. Too porous to be a vault. Too patient to be a witness. Maeve stood in the south transept with CSU while morning light pressed through stained glass and broke itself into orderly colors on the floor. The niche Quinn had opened was patched now. A square of new plaster the color of unbaked bread. CSU had cut a neat rectangle out of that patch and set it on a blue tray as if it were pastry. "Knife scorings fresh," the trace tech said, gloved finger hovering above the cut face. "You can see where the blade bit and skated. Frosty edges, still sharp. Older repairs get that chalk bloom." Maeve leaned in. The scribe marks ran parallel, the way a careful hand works when trying to keep a line pretty even while doing something ugly. Depth, 3 to 4 millimeters on average. The corners are relieved. Somebody knew how to pop a faceplate without shattering the field. See the beveled edge? Tape-wrapped chisel, like the father described, would keep it from ringing. On the transept floor, a dusting lay in a faint path. What Quinn had called a river of cold, the room had turned into a river of chalk. It started at the niche and went thin to the aisle, thinner to the side door, thinner still to the vestibule where boot traffic did what weather does, smeared and made the rest a guess. Maeve crouched and put a card down for scale. Lime and gypsum do not glitter, not really. But in the dust on the stone were flecks that caught the corner light and answered it. "Glass?" Maeve asked. "Looks like it," the tech said. "Let me get you something prettier than a guess." They took vacuum lifts and tape pulls along the aisle seam. Then from the side door's threshold where grit always collects like a small archive. At the sacristy sink, CSU had already bagged the trap screen. Maeve bent over the basin's steel and breathed the bleach and mineral smell of a building's low organs. In the catch lay a gray slurry, a drab galaxy spangled with microscopic, irregular glints. "We ran polarized light," the lab supervisor said later, handing over a thumbnail sheet with crisp images. "Calcium sulfate dihydrate gypsum, consistent with plaster and joint compound. Embedded particulates are soda-lime silica with reflective coating fragments. That points to laminated wallboard with integral retroreflective glass bead layer. Not your grandma's lath and plaster. Parking garage signage substrate," Maeve said. "Or anywhere you want paint and numbers to punch under poor light." "Exactly. We're seeing paper fiber, too. Towel lints blue, shop towels. Micros here along a long fiber consistent with someone wiping a blade or a seam. The sink's telling us a tool got cleaned in this bowl." Maeve wrote it down in the only order that mattered. Fresh scoring dust path sacristy rinse silica/glass beads in slurry match to parking board. She pulled the church's side door and felt the hinge give with a click that had been rehearsed 1,000 times by ushers' hands. Outside, Hanover Street made its weekday noise. The clink of cups, a bus sighing its brakes, a florist misting stems. The church's stoop held its own climate. The smell of wax and wet stone, tang of city salt. If you didn't know what to look for, the dust line at the threshold looked like any other scuff. But the vacuum filter bag would keep its quiet classification until the courtroom needed a moment of theater with science behind it. "Run the outside cam at 220 to 235, Maeve told Klein. They watched on a tablet propped against a hymnal rack. The vestibule cam gave them a distortion at the glass. Cheap fisheye lens, everything a little round and too democratic. But the timecode didn't lie. At 2:27, the frame admitted a hooded figure moving with the carefulness of someone not yet used to being a thief of churches. The bundle hugged to the chest was the size of a book wrapped in a towel. Head down, shoulders rounded, a shape trying to be shadow. The face caught light once and refused to resolve. "Stride?" Klein asked. "Shoe print cadence from the vestibule mat says 31 inches, so not tall, but stride changes under load. We'll get more from gate on the street cam." Across Hanover, a city camera that usually lived to catch double parkers offered them the figure's left side as it crossed the frame. The bundle's corner peeked under an arm. The right hand, there was a glove, but not a winter one. Nitro, maybe. Ambition in a hurry often forgets how fingerprints last longer than panic. "Overlay on Rourke?" Klein asked. "We will, but I want the dust to tell the story first," Maeve said. "No one argues with a mineral for long." By late afternoon, CSU had their first pass comparisons. Maeve stood in the lab under a light that made everyone look interrogated and watched slides become arguments. "Sample A," the analyst said, tapping a monitor sacristy sink residue. "Gypsum matrix, bead distribution count per field around 40 to 50. Bead diameter consistent with 60 to 80 microns, partial reflectivity coating visible on some cross-sections. Sample B," he went on, "transect of aisle dust nearest niche. Lower bead count, diluted by old dust, but composition matches. Sample C, door threshold, bead count up again, more recent. Sample D, battery wharf, janitor closet shelf wipe, shows the same bead population plus binder residue from a joint compound branded to a manufacturer used by Vale's preferred subcontractor. Proprietary brightener signature. It's like a cologne detective. You can smell whose it is." Maeve let herself smile with half her mouth, Kellner style, and hated the way it felt. "And sample E? From Vale's staging garage," the analyst said. The evidence tag on the tray read, "Vale, staging, East 3rd, pillar patch. Your team pulled a smear off a patched column yesterday. See the glass bead profile? Diameter cluster and coating degradation patterns are twins to a D. Add in the lime burns you saw on Mr. Rourke's hands and, well, we don't do narratives. But the particles dance together nicely." Maeve pictured the staging garage again. Vale's showroom of future buildings, a concrete box dressed up with samples. Brick veneers leaning like fallen books, a column with a raw, hurried patch where someone had misjudged a turn. She recalled the glitter when her flashlight raked the corner. Not glitter like fairy tales. Glitter like money trying to look like silence and getting it wrong. Chain the samples, she said. I want the lab report language clean. No overreach. Just numbers and nouns. Numbers and nouns, the analyst said, pleased, and wrote glass bead count /microns /proprietary brightener on his pad as if it were a prayer. After the lab, she walked the path again with Quinn, not for his benefit, but because sometimes your body needs to feel the distance your brain has drawn as a line on paper. Niche to aisle, aisle to door, door to street. At the corner, the city changed register. At night, the cameras would inherit what the streetlights didn't protect. Quinn watched her measure with her feet and did not offer theology. You think it was Rourke, he said after a time, as if stating whether. Because of the dust. Because of the Wi-Fi. Because he could walk in and not be seen. I think a maintenance man is a key ring, Maeve said. If someone wanted a problem carried between two worlds, he'd be the hand. He was very proud of his keys, Quinn said, with a sadness that had no edge in it. They went back inside. Maeve looked again at the sacristy sink's silver rim, at the gray they had rinsed out of its throat. She thought of hands, Rourke's, Quinn's, her own, touching the same plane of steel within hours of one another. The church had accepted each touch indifferently. Buildings don't bless or judge. They accumulate. Pull the staging garage footage, she told Klein. I want to see who patched that column and when. Then I want Rourke's GPS logs from his van. Full dump. If his routes draw a graph between here and Battery Wharf that night, we'll have a picture my grandmother could understand. Klein nodded. And Vale? Vale will wait, she said. The dust is walking faster than he is. She stopped in the nave where the light went long in late afternoon and watched dust motes do the work of stars. The church was warmer now, the boilers awake, the air pleats gone. The only cold she felt came from the part of her that knew what a 45-minute memo sounds like when it runs out of voice and becomes a room. The phone had become a witness because a human hand had asked it to be one and another human hand had buried it in a wall like contraband faith. Between those hands there had been a garage and a closet, an event that sang time. In the evening, the city camera office sent over a higher bitrate pull of Hanover at 227. Maeve froze the frame where the hooded figure crossed the stripe of light from a deli sign. The bundle's corner had shifted. A rectangle, yes, but the towel had slipped, and for a single interlaced line the screen showed a sliver of dark glass and a crack like a river delta etched into it. She tapped the glass with her nail, a soft, satisfied sound. Stone had told what it would. Glass had told the rest. Now she needed the man who had tracked dust from one world into another to open his mouth and find words that didn't break. Outside, the harbor horn spoke once, an old god clearing its throat. Maeve shut the laptop and made the next call. Part 5, the Parish Committee. St. Cormac's Parish Hall smelled like coffee and folding chairs. On the wall hung a corkboard layered with flyers. A fish fry from 3 Lents ago. A grief group with a phone number that had lost a digit. A watercolor of the church donated by someone who loved its leaning Maeve more than perspective. Maeve sat at the long table where committees performed the sacraments of minutes and motions. She preferred courts to committees. Courts admit their theaters. Father Quinn set down a tin of butter cookies that had become a year-round sacramental offering at every church on earth. Parish Council minutes, he said, sliding a binder over. Preservation Committee packet is tabbed. Ms. Doyle chaired it. The binder was clotted with transparency sleeves and the kind of paper clips that hope to be remembered. Maeve paged through agendas and emails printed out of habit. Clara's notes were neat, brisk. Her underlines lived in the margins like quiet verdicts. She'd collated statutes, annotated zoning language, stapled photographs of lintels and cornices like the faces of relatives. A memo on letterhead made Maeve pause. Meeting with maintenance, fire-stopping compliance. The signature line at bottom, Paul Rourke, Rourke Facility Services. Rourke attended? She asked. He services the parish boilers, the roof, the elevator that fails whenever the weather has opinions, Quinn said. He's also the contractor for several neighboring properties and, if the logo on his van tells the truth, Battery Wharf subbasement and common areas. He is busy. He likes to say the city rests on his key ring. Men who carry keys talk like that, Maeve said. The Preservation Committee had pushed back hard against Vale's waterfront project. Their letters were clipped, factual, polite to the point of ice. Clara had drafted most of them. She'd also kept a list of contractors interacting with parish property, citing conflicts of interest where they breathed. Rourke's name appeared twice. Once on an invoice for an emergency patch to the transept wall after a small earthquake of a carrier truck rumbled too close to the foundation last fall. Once for a temporary closure of the south entrance due to draft and weatherproofing. Draft? Huh? Klein muttered from a side chair, thumbing through the minutes. There's your building word for presence. Quinn smiled without amusement. Rourke likes to patch things that I would rather replace. I suspect replacing doesn't let him come back as often as patching does. Maeve closed the binder and looked at Quinn. I need his contact, his billing, and his van's GPS unit installed by your insurer. Most contractors accept a discount in exchange for trip logs. I'm going to exercise our curiosity. Quinn fetched a file folder so thin it had to contain the important page. Invoices, he said, and the city tax permit listing his fleet. He once bragged, again, about upgrading to a smart tracker after he locked his keys in the van outside a Bruins game. Pride goeth before discovery, Klein said, and dialed. 20 minutes later, Rourke Facility Services back office manager, a woman who sounded like a lock will close when she tells it to, emailed a login for the fleet portal. Maeve opened the dashboard on her phone. A map of the north end lit up with breadcrumb trails. Her finger drew a line between Battery Wharf and St. Cormac's on the night they cared about. The van's icon had moved at 1:57 from the wharf to Hanover, idled near the church at 2:04, then jumped, a tunnel of lost data, before pinging near the parish alley at 2:11 and again near the rectory at 2:19. Dead zone, Klein asked. Or someone toggled airplane mode to make his night look shorter, Maeve said. Either way, the gaps happen at exactly the points where eyes would matter. She exported the KML, smiled at the line it drew, and sent it to evidence with a note that said, Between Worlds. They found Rourke in the boiler room, sleeves rolled, radio clipped high on his shoulder like a constable who had misplaced his jurisdiction. Up close he looked like a man who had been sturdy for so long he'd mistaken it for virtue. Lime had kissed his knuckles to white. His left forefinger showed a crescent where an alkaline burn had bitten and healed as a pale moonglow. Mr. Rourke, Maeve said, you mind if we talk where the heat's not working so hard? He glanced at Quinn, then at the floor. I'm on the clock. I'll write the parish a love letter about your generosity, Maeve said, and led him into the hall. He folded his arms, then unfolded them when the knuckles caught his eye. He tucked his hands into his armpits as if to hide them from their own history. What's this about? Battery Wharf, Maeve said. And here, your van knows both addresses the way parishioners know pews. Late-night routes, day routes, routes that happen to overlap when a woman goes missing and a phone learns how to haunt a wall. I don't know anything about missing, he said. I fix things. The joint compound in the janitor's closet at the wharf matches the compound in your sacristy sink, Maeve said, level. Glass bead profile, binder brightener, everything right down to the cologne. You wash your knives in both places. You patched a column at Vale's staging garage with the same compound. Your hands carry lime burns, and lime is a jealous lover. It marks, it remembers. He licked his lips. Everybody uses the same stuff. Not exactly, Maeve said. Vendors are like parishes loyal to families. Your supplier sells a mix with a reflective bead for low-light numbers. It shows up where you work and nowhere else we've swabbed. We also have your fleet logs. You took a drive at 2 in the morning that ties a neat bow around 2 addresses and a problem. Would you like me to guess why? He smiled, a quick cut that didn't reach his eyes. You cops guess now? We listen, Maeve said, and we ask about friends. You know Marina Cobb. He blinked, just once. She's management. She cuts checks. She gets me work. She also extends credit, Maeve said. Your gambling markers show a balance on her ledger that would embarrass a better man. She fronts you through a holding company that happens to bid out Vale's contracts. It's a very efficient circle. It keeps men busy and hungry and brave at the wrong hours. His jaw worked. I owe some money. So does the church to the past. That doesn't make me a criminal. It makes you available, Maeve said. Klein's phone chimed. He leaned, listened, nodded. GPS overlay done. He's our guy for the handoff window. You move a bundled object from Battery Wharf to this church on the 21st, Maeve said. You carry plaster dust from a closet to a transept. You wipe a blade in a sink. And on your way, you pass a Wi-Fi hotspot named Adormus at 2:12 a.m. Your phone greets it like an old friend. Rourke's mouth opened, then shut. The radio on his shoulder hissed with someone else's crisis. Leak in the rectory washroom, and for a second he looked relieved that a pipe might save him. Didn't. Ms. Doyle was a good girl, he said finally, and that little condescension told Maeve more than confession would have. But she didn't understand that buildings have to breathe. You block a vent, you back a truck, you fix what breaks. You fix what you broke, Maeve said, or what someone told you to break. He looked at Quinn then, as if the collar might fray into clemency. Quinn's face did nothing but be a face, human and tired. Paul, he said quietly, tell the detective what you fixed. Rourke rubbed his knuckles against the fabric of his sleeves, as if friction could erase the pale scars. I fixed a wall someone else put a hole in. Who's someone else? Maeve asked. Someone with more money than me, he said. Someone who buys problems so they stop talking. Names, Maeve said. Not here, he said, glancing at the church like a man who would not swear in the parlor. Not in front of him. Maeve nodded once, a transaction of mercy. We can do this in a room without saints. Bring your phone. Bring your keys. He looked at his hands, at the map of old work, at the new pale arcs that only show up when a man forgets gloves in a hurry. I didn't hurt her, he said, and the pronoun landed wrong in the hall, like a number in the wrong column. I carried what someone told me to carry. Then carry your story, Maeve said, because right now the dust speaks better than you do. As they walked him out, Maeve passed the committee binder again and slid a page free. Clara's note about the south door draft. In the margin she'd written 3 words. Check the vent. It wasn't mystical. It was mechanical. The dead and the living both leave arrows if you set them down on paper. Outside, Quinn stood with his hands behind his back, the posture of men who have learned not to reach. You'll find the rest, he said. We'll force it to find us, Maeve said. She watched Rourke climb into his van with the uncertain gait of a man whose feet were new to floors that tilt. The fleet portal showed the engine wake. The breadcrumb began to draw itself. Next stop, Klein said. The wharf, Maeve answered. And the closet that sings every 14 seconds. We're going to make it sing for him. Part 6, The Last Hours of Clara Doyle. The night of March 21st did not begin as a tragedy. It began as a meeting that ran long the way meetings do. In the church basement, under buzzing lights that made everyone look slightly seasick, Clara Doyle stacked agendas, checked boxes, pressed a recalcitrant stapler. People argued about setbacks and facades, about historic character and economic vitality. The words were large. The room was small. At 10:41 p.m., the minutes show, she adjourned. The chair's pen stroke under meeting closed was decisive, the way she did most things. Cameras in the parish lot caught her wheeling her hybrid bike past a drift of smokers, helmet clipped to her bag like a promise. The night had laid a thin film of moisture on everything, March fog shrugging off the harbor, and the parking lot's light made halos on wet concrete. Her phone shows a text at 10:44. If I disappear, look under the altar. She sent it to Father Gabriel Quinn. He was asleep or pretending to be, collar on the chair, a book splayed face down, the parish router blinking its small green yes in the dark. Maeve read the message and tried not to indulge the narrative it invited. People type drama when they're frustrated or joking. They type prophecy exactly never. But Clara knew 2 things. That her fights had made her inconvenient, and that St. Cormac's was a place where she could hide a map in a word. From the parish lot to Battery Wharf is a short ride, the kind of route a cyclist knows by lamppost count. City cameras picked her up at 10:49 crossing a wet stripe of Commercial Street. The bike light winking red behind her like a bedside alarm swung into wind. At 10:53 she rolled past a storefront whose neon open cast a cheap daylight on her front rim. She turned down a service lane toward the sub-basement ramp. A delivery van leaving for the night gave her space. The loader on shift watched her go by and later told a uniform. She had that determined look. The look of people who can make you fill out forms just by asking. The garage's entrance camera had a blind spot right where the slope stops pretending to be street, which is exactly where human trouble likes to start. But the concrete told the part the camera missed. Maeve stood at the lip of the bay with a CSU flashlight and found the reflector shard tucked against a tire stop. Orange plastic bitten into a crescent with a stress mark like a white frown. Clara's bike had a crack on the left rear. The fragment matched like a jigsaw whisper. Her track, a fine wet signature, ended at that ramp throat and then broke under other prints. A night watchman on his rounds at 11:02 heard a woman speaking clear and fast, like she was doing customer service for someone who didn't deserve it. He heard, too, a guy whistling through his teeth, and not the cheerful way. The memo on the phone fills the silence the cameras keep. Clara's voice at 11:06, less patient than the minutes she signed, saying, "You don't get to demolish fire stops and call it value engineering." The male voice returns as a kind of pressure instead of speech. She says Ethan twice, clean. Not Mr. Vale. Not the developer. Ethan, first name on purpose because women learn early how men who collect properties collect deniability. At 11:09, the memo catches the tarp's breath. Fabric dragged off a roll, and the chalk's small clatter as they're kicked out of the way by someone used to making weight move. At 11:12, there is scuffle noise. Feet slipping a little on sealed concrete, an elbow striking something metal. The sudden intake of breath that tells a future jury what pain sounds like before anyone has the dignity to interpret it. Then hands touch the phone and the world goes muffled, swaddled against cloth. The fan keeps its metronome. The horn speaks when the bay door opens, then goes quiet. Maeve had the Coast Guard table spread on her desk like a nautical Bible and tracked the fog signal's cadence to the minute. It gave her confidence in the timestamps that phone metadata already authenticated. It also gave her a sense of tide. A garage by water has a pulse. If you listen long enough, you can take it. Witness canvas. Parish attendees who left at 10:45 remembered Clara saying she had to swing by Battery to photograph something before someone made it disappear. A neighbor on Commercial swore she saw those contractor types carrying something in plastic at 10:58. And although memories are liars, plastic often tells the truth on pavement. And says who found a slip of painter's sheeting snagged under a loading dock wheel. Vale's contractor logo lay on a drop cloth in the janitor's closet. Hard to argue with. Ready to be introduced to a chain of custody tag that would spell its final destination. Digital canvas. Clara's email drafts folder showed a subject line begun and abandoned at 6:12 p.m. Battery Wharf life safety violations. Photos attached. No attachments yet. Her notes app contained 3 bullet points, the last typed at 9:23. Vent blocked, signage wrong, missing intumescent. A woman who writes intumescent on a Tuesday night is a person who intends to fight on Wednesday morning. Maeve took the phone's fitness app data, heart rate, steps, because bodies record what pride refuses to. At 10:54, her heart rate rose into the 120s, then stayed there in the warm red of adrenaline. Steps accumulated around the sub-basement in a loose figure-8 pattern until 11:10, then scattered as if memory itself became imprecise. At 11:15, the watch registered an impact it tried to classify as a fall. After 11:16, the sensors recorded movement, but not steps, shifts, carries, a human object being turned into evidence against itself. At 12:03, nothing. Then nothing again, thick and patient, the way a room returns to HVAC after it has held breath. Timeline. Conservatively, Maeve bracketed time of death between 11:05 and 12:15. She left herself permission for later science to draw the line harder. Lividity patterns, temperature in the bay, the guitar string of a tendon telling time to a pathologist. But for now, the bracket served. Clara alive and speaking at 11:06. Silence by 12:15. A priest's keycard ping at 2:13 that would become a different kind of clock. The city's tollbooth cameras showed Ethan Vale's sedan exiting the Leather District at 10:36 and entering the North End corridor at 10:52. His phone, through counsel, would later claim to have been on a kitchen counter in Beacon Hill charging. Beacon Hill kitchens do not drive. At 11:04, a private garage plate reader 2 blocks from Battery captured a license framed handsomely by a dealer plate. It matched Vale's. The system even made a courteous ping noise when it read a number it recognized. Marina Cobb's messages, seized under warrant, stitched the hour together in a colder thread. 11:01. He's on edge. Make sure no one is filming. Asterisk asterisk 11:07. Stop the girl. No bruises on the face. Asterisk asterisk 11:19. Is it done? The replies, scrubbed with a coward's attention to phrasing, did not save her. Handled, teaching humility, moving the thing. Thing, Maeve said aloud in the AV room, and the word felt like a small blasphemy, the way euphemisms always do when they're asked to carry weight they can't metabolize. At 11:28, Rourke's van left Battery's subbasement, the fleet portal drawing its breadcrumb line like a patient nurse stitching a wound. The van idled a block from the church at 11:36, dipped out of network, reappeared in the alley at 11:42, then disappeared again because sometimes phones get shy in the presence of God or brick or both. At 12:12, his device checked in with a cell tower by the Greenway as if coming up for air. Maeve stood where Clara had likely stood, the lip of the bay, the vent above making its thin, rising whistle, and tried to borrow the last minutes. It's an arrogant habit, and detectives learn to do it with their palms up. Like beggars, no fists. Clara had confronted men in garages before. She knew to keep her voice flat, to keep her chin level, to say names. Women who do this carry a ledger of small victories and a separate ledger of times they were ignored. She had her phone running, a witness in her pocket, because sometimes a woman learns that no one will believe a sentence until a slab of glass says it too. Maeve followed the figure eight Clara's steps had made. She measured the distances between the janitor's closet and the bay floor tape, between the post and the paint scar on the column where a patch had hurried to forget an impact. She put her hand against the concrete and felt nothing a poem would respect. Good. She didn't need poetry. She needed geometry. Back at her desk, the timeline pinned itself to cork with clean little dots. 10:41, adjournment. 10:44, text to Quinn. 10:49, commercial street camera. 10:53, service lane neon. 11:06, voice memo names Ethan. 11:12, tarp, chocks, scuffle. 11:15, fall event on watch. 12:15, recording ends. 2:13, Quinn's keycard. 2:23, metal scrape in niche. 2:27, hooded figure crossing Hanover with a bundle. Tie them, Klein said from her doorway. We will, Maeve said. To hands and not just places. Rourke? He asked. He's the carry, she said. But I want Ethan's breath in that room within the window. Not a whiff. A lungful. She drafted the warrant addenda for Vale's vehicle transponder data, for Marina's deleted messages, for the garage's private vendor cell repeater logs. People forget that basements hire their own little networks, and those networks keep their own memories. She requested the valet dispatch pings, the elevator call logs, the freight override key usage. Not one of those items was romantic. Each could be read to a jury like a bedtime story that ends in light. At the parish, Father Quinn returned Clara's text with a message he would later admit he wished he had sent earlier. Are you safe? He sent it at 12:31 a.m. The bubble never turned blue. By dawn the next day, the harbor mist burned off in thin threads, and Battery Wharf looked exactly like the brochures the developers printed. Clean light on clean water, brick pretending to be old. Maeve stood by the railing and let seagulls practice their indictments overhead. The wind came from the east, soft as an excuse. Behind her, in the garage, a vent sang its 14-second rise and fall, and somewhere in the stone of St. Cormac's, a square of plaster considered how often it had been asked to remember. Time window's hard, Klein said, eyes on the ledger in his hand. But it's enough. It's enough to trap someone who thinks time is elastic, Maeve said. Next we make him show us the room he used to make it so. Part 7, The Open Confessional. The rectory parlor had the modest aesthetic of a man who believed good taste was a form of humility. A brown armchair that swallowed the weary, a bookcase that had been dusted by someone who loved the spines, a crucifix that didn't try to argue with the room. Maeve set her recorder on the coffee table and, out of courtesy rather than necessity, asked, "Permission to record?" Father Gabriel Quinn nodded. "Actions and observations," he said, glancing at the device with the same polite wariness he reserved for incense that came from a can. "No doctrine. That's the boundary," Maeve said. "If we step near it, I'll pull us back." Klein sat in the doorway with a legal pad, his bulk blocking escape routes in a way that made subjects talk straighter. Maeve opened her notebook to a page labeled in tidy block caps. "Sequence, not theory. Let's start with the keyword," she said. "Adoremus. Latin for let us adore," Quinn said. "It lives in the music, but it also lives on a laminated sheet of paper by the transept router." He stood, crossed to the bookshelf, and took down a plastic sleeve like a teacher producing a map. Inside was the Wi-Fi credential card the youth group had made. Adoremus on one line, password. Sanctus 33 on the next, serif font trying to be solemn. They insisted people needed easy access during community nights. I insisted the router be near stone and far from confessionals. "You posted this near the niche," Maeve said. "On the south transept wall, 3 feet to the right," he said. "At eye level for people my height, lower than most teenagers care to look. A compromise. My vocation in a word." "Did Clara ever reference that term in correspondence?" Maeve asked. Quinn nodded. She had a habit of using him titles as hints in emails. To me, to the choir director, even in subject lines to annoy city officials whose Latin was rusted. Ubi caritas to mean where are the donations going. Tantum ergo to mean this deserves reverence. It was a private shorthand. When I felt the cold draft, the word that came to mind wasn't random. It arrived on a path she and I had already laid. "Noted," Maeve said. "We'll frame it as a memory association, not a visitation." He accepted that with a priest's half-smile that conceded the point without surrendering his soul. "I felt led," he said simply, "but I am content if you write." He remembered a sign and followed it. "The essential event is the same." My hands went where they needed to. "Describe those hands," Maeve said. "Everything you touched." He rolled his sleeves. "Keycard at 213. Door handle vestibule. Pew end when I steadied myself at the aisle's 4th row. The transept wall, lower left quadrant of the niche. Sacristy drawer with tools, top right drawer, blue tape on the handle. The plaster knife, the chisel with tape around its bite, blue shop towels from a box with a torn corner. The altar cloth from Tuesday's set. White linen with a faint scorch mark near the hem from a candle 3 Advents ago. I touched the phone only through the cloth. I did not power it on. I placed it on the stainless counter, reached into the junk drawer for a charging cable, and then I called the watch commander. "Did you wash anything?" Maeve asked. "I rinsed the chisel and knife," he said, face flicking through annoyance at himself. "A reflex, clean your tools, father. Not my best moment for preserving trace, but I believe your team found enough in the trap." "They did," Maeve said. "The sink told us the same story your hands are telling." Klein flipped a page. "Let's do router logs," he said. Quinn handed over a printout, initialed on the margin. "I don't pretend to understand MAC addresses as anything but sequences that want to be initials," he said. "But our admin page lists associations. At 2 hours 12 minutes and 31 seconds, a device with a label in our system, Rourke phone, attempted association. It checked and disconnected almost immediately. The sexton, Mr. Rourke, once asked me to whitelist his device so he could get signal while tuning the boiler. I told him the boiler needs no scripture or signal. He taped the number to his toolbox anyway. I've retaped it twice after it fell off." Maeve scanned the sheet. The column of hexadecimal looked like a hymn in a different notation. At 2:12, Rourke's device had looked for the church like a thirsty man looks for a bar. At 2:13, Quinn's keycard declared something more old-fashioned. A door opened by a human hand. "You recognize this towel brand?" she asked, showing him a photograph from the janitor's closet at Battery Wharf. A roll of blue shop towels with a missing chunk, the perforations torn in a way that creates its own fingerprint. Quinn leaned in. "The same brand sits under our sacristy sink. Rourke keeps his inventory there. He likes the blue. It doesn't look dirty as quickly. There's a vanity in that preference, or perhaps a poverty." "We'll confirm the SKU," Maeve said. "Small things make big chains." He looked at her recorder, then at the crucifix, and then at the window where late light made a rectangle on the sill. "Detective," he said. "Ms. Doyle once confided that if she ever needed me to find something, she would hide it where my hand would go by habit. She said, under the altar or behind the saints. Father. Someplace you love and will protect without thinking." She was half teasing, half not. "Do you remember when she said that?" Maeve asked. "In January," he said, "after a city meeting where Mr. Vale's counsel suggested that community opposition could be managed by selective access to information. She had that look. What do you call it? Irish stubbornness with Boston aims." "We call it a spine," Maeve said. He nodded once, as if in blessing. "Then we talked about the router." She laughed at the password. "She told me if I ever needed to tell her where to go in this building without telling her outright, I could say a title at the right moment. Adoremus would place her here. O Salutaris would place her at the North Chapel. She loved puzzles that led to locks." Maeve wrote, "Clara Habit Rehim titles equals wayfinding." She added, "Supports Adoremus as prompt, not apparition." A jury liked words like prompt. It suggested agency without asking anyone to sign a metaphysical receipt. "Now the hard line," she said. "Has anyone told you anything under a seal that bears on this case?" He looked at her as if she'd asked whether he breathed. "If they had, I would not say." "Then we won't ask again," she said. "Outside the seal? I heard a man in our vestibule after Mass 2 Sundays before Miss Doyle died," he said. He spoke to no one, just to the air, saying, "She never stops." The voice was tired, angry. "That is an observation, not a confession." Later that day, Ms. Cobb cornered me near the parish office and suggested we be realistic about the neighborhood's needs. She used the phrase "teach humility" to describe an approach to civic engagement. I remember the phrase because it struck me as a strange thing to do to humility. "Did Rourke attend any committee sessions?" Maeve asked. "He stood in the back once," Quinn said. "He watched Clara explain what an intumescent coating does." His face was closed, which is his usual expression when a woman speaks with authority. Klein jotted a note that simply read, "face closed," because sometimes you need the human sentence as much as the lab one. Maeve slid a photo across the table. The janitor's closet at Battery Wharf, the vent above, the tarp with Vale's subcontractor logo, the wedge blocks. "Have you seen this drop cloth before?" Quinn didn't touch the photo. "That logo appears on 3 pallets at the staging garage where Mr. Vale plays at architecture. Mr. Rourke's van ferries such cloths through our neighborhood like liturgical banners, except no one genuflects." Maeve let herself smile, quick and small. "We'll genuflect to invoices instead." She clicked off the recorder. "Father, I'll be calling you to testify to the sequence you just gave me. No mystery, just a wall, a cloth, a phone. I can say that without injury to conscience," he said. "I will not say what I cannot. If the court likes its ghosts with barcodes, I will hand them one." Klein rose, stretching the kind of stretch that tells a room gravity still works. "One more," he said. "The night you went to the transept, why did you go then? Why not in the morning?" Quinn's mouth found a line between apology and defiance. "Because the air changed, Sergeant. Because this house knows my steps. And that night it made a path of cold where there should be none. And because a young woman had taught me where to look when adults were lying." Maeve walked him to the transept and stood him where he'd stood. The patch over the niche had set. It was smooth as an unsaid thing. "When you testify," she said, We will keep you in verbs. Asterisk I entered. I touched. Cut. I found. I called. Asterisk. And if the room turns cold? He asked, not quite teasing. Then we will ask facilities to fix the draft, she said, and tell the jury that a draft led to evidence. He inclined his head, priest to detective, a brief exchange of respect between two sacraments with different fonts. As they left, the router above the laminated sign blinked its indifferent green. The word on the card, Adormus, sat quietly, a password to a network, a title to a hymn, a breadcrumb in a dead woman's scavenger hunt, and the mildest of miracles. A reminder that even in a church, sometimes the best way to hear a voice is to follow the signal. Part 8, The Waterfront Trap. They served the warrant to Rourke's van at dawn because men who fix things wake early. The Ford sat in a diagonal staff space behind St. Cormac's with its keys in its own mouth. Retractable belt chain clipped to the ignition like a leash. Maeve photographed the ring before she touched it. Parish master, janitor closet, elevator override fob, a brass church key worn thin by use, and a chipped plastic fob stamped BW load in white letters that had learned to flake. Inside the van, order fought a losing war with habit. A milk crate held knives, the plaster kind, wrapped with blue tape at the bite. A tool bag had 2 chisels, one rubbed smooth at the haft where a hand had taught it manners. Under a rag heap, CSU lifted a roll of blue shop towels with a missing chunk whose tear pattern matched the one in the battery closet photo. The floor pan glittered in the morning light where glass beads had fallen and lodged in the seams. A tiny Milky Way no one had asked for. Klein logged each bag as if he were paying for them with pieces of his patience. Fob, he said, tagging the plastic. Blade set, towels, sample sweep from pan, photo all. Rourke stood to one side with a union representative who'd managed to make his hair look like dignity. All this because I run a clean truck? The rep said, trying out a joke that didn't fit. All this because a woman's phone took a ride in your orbit, Maeve said. We're going to the wharf, Mr. Rourke. You're coming. Bring your keys. He came, hands in his jacket like a man keeping birds from escaping. Battery Wharf had the clean edges of money. The concierge's politeness wore a lanyard. Residents pretended not to look, the way people pretend not to read a neighbor's mail when it's left open in the hall. In the management office, Marina Cobb wasn't present. Her chair was, but her policies were. The building's fire panel lay behind a plexiglass cover that kept fingers hopeful and honest. Maeve showed the letter from the fire marshal authorizing a drill. Full alarm test, 1400 hours, elevators to fire mode, doors locked per sequence. She'd chosen the time because the concierge had said it was quiet then, because quiet makes the guilty think they can whisper. At 1358, the sub-basement bays felt empty in a way that isn't vacancy so much as attention. CSU had prepositioned a sound rig under the vent in the janitor's closet so the whistle cycle would be captured while the fire fans spun up. She wanted timbre, not just tempo, and sometimes a building needs to sing louder for you to hear its note. Maintenance staff gathered as if for a birthday no one wished to celebrate. Rourke hung back, tongue worrying the inside of his cheek like a man checking a tooth he already knew was bad. Maeve and Klein rode the freight elevator down with a fire tech who knew his panel the way organists know stops. At 1400 hours sharp, the horn burped and the fans took their first lungful. Doors clacked. Elevator logic changed personalities. Somewhere above, children complained at being told to put on shoes. Down here, the vent cleared its throat and rose, climbing into that thin 14-second keen that had lived inside Clara's memo like a metronome. The closet door jiggled on its lock in a draft that smelled of bleach and damp gypsum. Okay, Klein said over the fan. Wake the rats. Maeve waved Rourke forward. Keys, she said. He looked at Klein, then at the closet, then at the ceiling as if God might have left him a hatch. I'm not sure You've opened this door 100 times, Maeve said. Stop performing uncertainty. It doesn't fit you. He took out his key ring like a man surrendering a belt at jail. He selected a key by feel. His hand knew the teeth it had taught to behave. The closet opened on the smell she remembered and on objects that had learned not to blink when lights came on. Mop, bucket, ladder, tarp with Vale's contractor logo. Wedge blocks with a little lip of rubber chewed white where weight kissed it too hard. A box of blue towels with the corner torn. Above, the vent pitched its note, rising, falling, a patient ghost with a calendar. "Step inside," Maeve said. He did, and the air condensed around him the way it does when a man steps back into the sentence he wrote. The microphone read the room. On Clara's track, at minute 9 and 41 seconds, the whistle had caught a harmonic that sounded like a complaint inside the note. Here, now, as the fans pushed, the same harmonic crawled across the rig's needles. Klein didn't need the scope to tell him. The look on his face said he'd heard it in his sleep after the first listen and would keep hearing it until a jury took it from him. "Why the tarp?" Maeve asked, keeping her voice conversational, as if asking about a Sunday roast. "For dust," Rourke said, which sounded like a perverse form of truth. "And the wedge blocks?" "For stabilizing loads," he said. "For keeping something from rolling where it shouldn't." "Like a body?" Klein asked, too blunt on purpose. Rourke's mouth found an uglier, smaller version of a smile. "Like a pallet, like a dolly, like anything with wheels." "We found hair on that tarp," Maeve said. "We will match it. We will map the scuffs on those wedges to arcs on the bay floor. We will make a diagram that turns this closet into a map that matches a track on a dead woman's phone. Do you want to introduce it to the jury yourself? Or shall I?" His throat clicked. "You're putting this all on me because I fix things. You ever think maybe I fixed something someone richer broke?" "Every day," Maeve said. "That's why you're standing here now instead of somewhere with bars. We're giving you a chance to move weight in the other direction." The fire tech peered in, more curious than he intended to look. "We good to reset, Detective?" "In 2, Maeve said. She crouched and ran a gloved finger under the lowest ventilator slat. Dust came away gray on blue. In it, glitter. The same little beads that had stuck in the van's seams and in the parish sink and in Maeve's head. "Marina texted you that night," she said, straightening. "We have the messages." Asterisk stopped the girl. "No bruises on the face." Asterisk and later, moving the thing. "She doesn't say phone. She says thing. Tell me what the thing was." He chewed at the air where a cigarette would have lived years ago when buildings were allowed to be worse for you. "She tells a lot of people a lot of things." "And Vale?" Maeve asked, tone dull as a ledger. "What did he tell you?" Rourke looked up into the vent's mouth as if into a second, harder heaven. When he spoke, it was the tired defiance of men who know their leverage has expired. He said the protesters were getting personal. He said someone needed a lesson. He said no marks where cameras like to live. He said the city respects firmness. "What did you do, Paul?" she asked, and let his name be an invitation instead of an accusation. "I kept her from filming," he said, a statement without adjectives. "I moved a tarp. I put down wedges. I told her to stop. She didn't stop. She kept talking like she had me on a leash made of rules. You ever been talked to like that?" He laughed, one cough of sound. "Of course you have. You look like you make a hobby of it." "Did you hit her?" Klein asked. "No," he said, and for the first time he seemed to want the word to land clean. "I grabbed her wrist when she lifted the phone. I tried to pull the thing out of her hand. The other one..." He stopped, reshaped the sentence as if it were clay. "The other one panicked." "Name," Maeve said, and the word sounded like a key turning. He didn't give it. Not yet. He looked at the floor, at the triangle of dirty light the open door made on concrete, at the wedge blocks chewed white. His shoulders fell into a posture that made him look smaller and younger and, briefly, almost forgivable. "You said you'd show me the room," he muttered. "We're standing in it," Maeve said. "But there's another room. The one you used to make her lie still while you decided what a lesson looks like." The fire tech said, "Detective, because procedure has rhythms too." She nodded. "Reset." The fans sighed down. The whistle cooled. The closet receded from opera to hum. Maeve stepped back. Rourke came out into the loading bay as if stepping from a stage where the play had not gone well. She gestured to the freight elevator. "Up," she said. "You know the way." He led because muscle memory outranks shame. Past the loading lane. Left at the trash room. Key in an unmarked door, short corridor, single bulb that flickered like a confession trying to be heard. He stopped at a final utility door, looked at it as if it could learn mercy, and unlocked it. Inside, a room the size of an apology. Shelves of cleaning supplies, a wire spool, a technician's stool. On the wall, scuffed paint where a dolly had bumped. On the floor, a faint rust-colored crescent where liquid had wicked into concrete and dried in a halo. CSU would tell the court what kind of liquid and how old. They would do it without adjectives. Above the crescent, a scrape at hip height where metal had kissed wall in a hurry. And in the corner, folded neat and wrong, a drop cloth with Vale's logo turned in, as if modesty could launder a mark. Klein's breath went out of him in one word that wasn't a word. Maeve's pen drew a small box in the air, the way you do when you are framing a photograph you will never show to anyone you love. Vent above sings at 14, she said softly. Door lock matches Rourke's ring. Cloth matches his van. Beads match his sink. Path matches his GPS. The only thing missing is the sentence that starts with I and ends with a name. He let the silence stand with them until it learned to be useful. I carried the phone, he said at last. I didn't know what else to do. She was already, he swallowed. And Marina said move the thing. And Ethan said, there, the half-dropped stone. The room leaned toward it with them. Finish it, Maeve said. He said, teach humility, Rourke whispered, as if the vent were still singing and he needed to pitch under it. He said, no bruises on the face. He said, make sure no one is filming. And then everything got quick. And then it got quiet. And then it got like this. Like this, Maeve repeated, and wrote it down because writing makes rooms real. You'll tell a judge the rest. They walked him back through the corridors that had learned the shape of his shoulders. In the lobby, residents pretended to discover an urgent email on their phones. The concierge looked at the marble floor like it was responsible. Outside, the harbor wore its dull afternoon like a coat. The wind carried salt and the sound of a horn far off, one long note that felt like a straight line through fog. Cuff him, Klein said, and did it with the methodical dignity of a man whose hands have practiced not hurting anyone they don't have to. Rourke didn't resist. He breathed like a man who had been waiting to exhale into a system that would tell him when to stand and when to sit and would, for a while, take his keys. Maeve looked up at the brick above the bay door, the fake old of it, the signaling, and felt the hum she always felt when good procedure locked into place. Not triumph, alignment. The vent's 14-second hymn still ghosted her inner ear. It would be waiting for them in court, ready to sing again. Part 9, Who Ordered the Silence? Interviews happen in rooms that pretend to be neutral. This one had off-white walls and a table with a scar that looked like a coastline. Maeve sat across from Paul Rourke and let the recorder see them both. Klein stood at the door, a quiet negative space. Rourke's hands, free for now, found each other in a knot that kept untying. For the record, Maeve said, state your full name. Paul Francis Rourke. You understand why you're here. He stared at the tabletop coastline. Because I carried the phone. And because a woman died in a room you opened, Maeve said. We're going to ask you about orders. Whose they were. How they reached you. The difference between hands and intent. He breathed once, heavily, as if filling for a dive. I was told to stop the girl. By whom? Marina, he said, and the name left a grease spot in the air. She handles issues. She said it was getting out of hand. She said there were optics. Did she use the words no bruises on the face? Rourke blinked. Yes. Maeve slid a printed text thread toward him. Cobb's messages seized under warrant and exhumed from the graveyard where people bury the words they regret. He read his own replies as if someone else's fingers had typed them. Handled. Teaching humility. Moving the thing. Asterisk asterisk. I didn't mean, he began. Maeve held up a hand. We are not here to polish adverbs. We are here to name actors. Did Marina Cobb act alone? A head shake, small. She doesn't. Not with money that isn't hers. Ethan Vale, Maeve said. Rourke's mouth worked and then settled. He wanted the noise to stop. His exact words, Maeve said. Say them into the microphone. Rourke's eyes found the scar on the table again. He said, "Stop the girl. No bruises on the face." And earlier, when he was talking about protesters, maybe 2 weeks before, he said, "Teach humility," like he'd read it on a poster. "Where and when?" Klein said. "In the staging garage," Rourke said. "He comes by late when he wants to feel like a builder, stands under the lights and stares at his own columns." He said it with his hands in his pockets like men do when they want to look like they're not issuing orders. Maeve wrote, "Staging garage late. Phrasing consistent." Then quieter, "Were you paid extra for the night in question?" He nodded. "Cash. How much?" 5,000. His cheeks flushed under the fluorescent as if the number had body heat. "From whom?" "Marina," he said. "She leaves envelopes. Sometimes under the seat of the van. Sometimes taped in the janitor's closet behind the bleach. She thinks that's clever." "Is there a ledger?" Maeve asked, and slid another printout across. An office spreadsheet from Cobb's desk, black lines and pale cells where someone had tried to make money behave. The column header "Emergency Repairs" repeated like a spell. One rose date matched the night Clara died. Rourke stared. "She called it repairs even when we were breaking things." Maeve let the silence fill the room in a soft, pressureless way. Neither threat nor comfort, just the fact of a clock moving. "Tell me what happened after the scuffle." "I grabbed her wrist," he said. "Tried to get the phone. The other guy. Name." He swallowed. "Lino Barberi. Vale's subcontractor foreman. He works the docks. He thinks short is a personality." Rourke stared at his knuckles. He panicked. Shoved. "She went down wrong." It was quick like a mistake in math. "Did Vale see her?" Maeve asked. Rourke rubbed the crescent scar on his forefinger. "Lime pale. He came in late. After." He stood in the bay doorway and looked like a man who has just decided the elevator lobby marble is the wrong white. He said, "Handle it." He didn't step closer. "Did he touch anything?" "The door frame," Rourke said, "with 2 fingers. Like the room smelled bad and he didn't want it on him." "What did Cobb say?" "She called," he said. "Told me to move the thing. Told me not to be seen. Told me which cameras sleep." "How did she know which cameras sleep?" Maeve asked, already writing the answer. "She made the contract with the security vendor," he said. "She knows where money buys naps." Maeve tapped the ledger. At 1:19 she texts, "Is it done?" Your reply is handled. "Did you speak to Vale again?" "On the loading dock," he said. He stood under the vent and asked if there'd be bruises. I said no. He said, "Then the narrative is optics," and walked away. "Did you place the phone behind the transept niche because you thought it would be found?" Maeve asked, watching his face decide whether to tell on itself. He hesitated. "She told me to make it disappear, but He closed his eyes, opened them. "I put it where someone with clean hands would find it. Because," Maeve said softly, "because I've buried enough things in walls," he said, voice gone thinner. "And because she fought like someone who deserved to be heard, even if she was wrong about how buildings breathe." "The router sign helped you," Maeve said. "Yeah," he admitted. "I don't read Latin, but I read laminated. The youth group put that, a door, whatever, near the wall. It made me think I was hiding it in a church word. I thought I was being clever. I was being obvious." "Describe the payment route," Klein said, nudging him back into structure. "Marina texts," he said. "Says there's an envelope. The ledger says repairs. Vale signs off budgets through a shell. Barberi invoices per hour he didn't work. Everyone pretends to be busy. Phone records place Vale in the corridor outside the loading bay between 11:02 and 11:09, Maeve said, sliding a printed pull from the building's repeater logs. Elevator fob shows his private floor key at 10:58. Garage plate reader puts his sedan 2 blocks south at 11:04. "Do you contest any of this?" "No," he said. And in the no there was relief like heat leaving a pipe. "Say his name into the microphone," Maeve said. "Ethan Vale," he said. "He gave the order." He didn't mean, I don't know what he meant, but he said the words that made everything quick. Maeve clicked the recorder off and left the room with Klein. In the hallway, they stood under a humming light and held still the way you do when the case's spine clicks into alignment. Barbary, Klein said. We bring him in before his courage leaves him. And Cobb, Maeve said. Her ledger goes to a grand jury wrapped in a bow. Vale gets to spend the night contemplating his marble. Barbary came in hard and left softer. Confronted with the closet, the wedge blocks, a single hair on the tarp matched to Clara Doyle by mitochondrial luck. He whispered apologies to a woman no longer there and agreed to speak the next day with counsel that would tell him how bargains are made. Cobb tried hauteur first. In her office, all chrome and air. She sat with one leg stacked over the other like a slash mark and said, Are we done posturing? Maeve put the ledger down and didn't touch it again. Cobb touched it twice. By the time they reached the row with emergency repairs, $5,000, 2:17 a.m. Her lipstick had migrated to the rim of a water glass in a perfect vermilion crescent. We will cooperate, her attorney said quickly, which is the song rats sing when the water reaches the shelf. Vale required theater. Maeve served him in his own lobby because men who build towers pretend to be weather in public. The order and the cuffs made a small, bright constellation in marble reflection. He kept his face level for the cameras that arrived on cue, then flicked his gaze at Maeve as if to place her in a taxonomy. You can't be serious, he said, and the word serious sounded like a line item. We are procedural, Maeve said. It reads more honestly. At booking, the fog rolled in off the harbor like a stagehand dimming the house. The vent at Battery Wharf sang to itself in the old 14-second way. In evidence, glass beads sat in little vials, idiot stars ready to be sworn. In a lab, a drop cloth gave up fiber and hair and a tiny constellation of dust that did more work than any speech. Back in her office, Maeve wrote a note to herself she knew would live in the file forever. Hands. Rourke. Panic. Barbary. Money/directive. Cobbvale. ***, she underlined directive twice. She added, Clara's memo equals spine. Father's sequence equals path. Then she shut the notebook and let the quiet of the room settle around her like the moment after a verdict that hasn't been read yet but is already decided in the lungs of the jury. In the corridor, Klein leaned against the doorframe with 2 paper cups. I got you the coffee that tastes like consequence. She took it, grimaced, drank. Tomorrow, she said, we put a collar on the word presence and teach it how to testify. Tomorrow, Klein agreed. Outside, the city pressed its ear to the courthouse steps and waited. The harbor horn gave one long note across the water, a line you could walk in fog if you were careful and wanted very much to arrive. Part 10 Court Oath and Air That Turns Cold. The courtroom had the bright, indifferent light of an operating theater. People forget how much fluorescent bulbs love justice. Reporters filled the back benches, their notebooks poised like traps. Jurors filed in, faces in the neutral gear of citizens who know their lives have been temporarily rented. At counsel table, Ethan Vale wore the suit of a man who believes fabric can arbitrate the soul. Marina Cobb sat one row behind him, her calm arranged by an expensive hand. Paul Rourke waited in a side room with a lawyer who looked like a tax bill. Call your witness, Judge Hartnett said. The wall clock measured time as if it had been sworn. Defense calls Father Gabriel Quinn, Kellner announced, letting his voice brush the courtroom like a sleeve. The priest came down the aisle between pews of strangers and took the stand. The clerk administered the oath. Quinn's yes was a plain syllable in a room that enjoys embellishment. Kellner stepped forward with the posture of a man offering reason to a skittish animal. Father, please state your name and role. Gabriel Michael Quinn, he said, pastor of St. Cormac's Parish. Were you present in your church in the early hours of March 21st of this year? I was. Tell the jury briefly what you did. Quinn glanced once at Maeve where she sat behind the Commonwealth's table with Ada Levine. She kept her face unhelpful. He turned back to the jurors. I entered the church at 2:13 a.m. I walked down the center aisle to the south transept. I examined a plastered niche. I removed the face of the niche with tools from the sacristy. I found a wrapped object, which proved to be a cellular phone. I took it to the sacristy, plugged it to charge, and called the police. I did not power the device on. I preserved what I could. Kellner nodded, pleased by verbs. Why did you go to the transept wall? Because something drew my attention there, Quinn said. A flow of cold air and a memory of the word posted near the router. He allowed himself half a breath. But I am not here to testify about causes, only actions and observations. Indeed, Kellner said quickly, not eager to awaken Hartnett's disapproval. Your Honor, with the court's leave, we'd like to publish several exhibits. Keep it within the scope, Hartnett said. The screens warmed. Exhibit D, the vestibule camera footage, timestamp 2 hours 13 minutes and 12 seconds. Father Quinn entering alone. Exhibit E, the transept angle, Quinn kneeling, tools from the sacristy, the careful scribing along an old scene. The audio from the choir mic came through the system. Room tone, breath, the faint metallic slide behind plaster. Then, soft as silk, the single word that had obsessed columnists and grandmothers. Adoremus. One juror blinked hard and wrote the word phonetically. Another looked down at her hands. Kellner let the sound hang for 2 beats as if it were incense. Father, he said gently, did you say that word? No, Quinn said. I heard it, but I did not speak it aloud. Kellner moved on like a dancer who had dipped a toe into forbidden choreography and stepped back to the approved steps. Exhibit F, he said. Router logs from St. Cormac's. Father, do these reflect an attempted association at 2:12 a.m. by a device labeled in your parish system as Mr. Paul Rourke's phone? They do. And Exhibit G, Kellner continued. The choir mic waveform synchronized to the removal of the niche face. Father, is that your hand removing the plaster rectangle? It is. Kellner thanked him, then adopted the air of a man who wished to seem magnanimous while sliding a thorn across an opponent's palm. No further questions at this time. Levine stood for the Commonwealth. She didn't walk so much as establish a line between the jury and the facts. Father Quinn, she said, you have described your actions clearly. Thank you. A few clarifications. Yes, you did not receive a sacramental confession relating to this case. No, and you are not testifying to supernatural causes. I am not. When you say a flow of cold drew your attention, you also mean that a sign, the word Adormus taped near a router, was posted near that niche. Yes, your hands acted because you felt a draft and remembered a sign. Yes, you used a chisel wrapped in tape and a plaster knife from the sacristy toolbox. Yes, you rinsed those tools in the sacristy sink. Yes, he said, and I regret that. Regret is not evidence, Levine said, but your honesty is noted. You called police within minutes. I did. Levine turned a page. You recognized the blue shop towels you used as the same brand kept by the parish maintenance man, Mr. Rourke. Yes. No more, Your Honor. Kellner rose again, a quick puff of theater. Father, did you find a phone? Yes. Did you hide it there? No. Thank you. Hartnett gestured. You may step down. Quinn returned to his pew of strangers. He looked briefly at Maeve as he passed, the barest spray of gratitude breaking the surface. She kept her focus ahead. Next witness, next hinge. Commonwealth calls Sergeant Paul Klein, Levine said. Klein took the stand with the weary decorum of a man who has sworn to tell the truth so many times it has become a sacrament he resents. He testified to chain of custody. The phone recovered from the sacristy, bagged, hashed, mirrored, the altar cloth sealed, the niche dust swabbed, the sacristy sink trap pulled. He spoke in dates and file numbers like a man reciting liturgy in a language he knows by ear. Publish Exhibit H, Levine said. The 45-minute voice memo rolled in a curated reel. Not all of it. Hartnett would not allow the jury to take a sonic nap, but enough. Clara's voice, steady and indignant. The male pressure against the microphone that refused to name itself. The background punctuation. reversing beeper, gulls, foghorn, and then the 14-second whistle rising and falling, a metronome for dread. "Sergeant," Levine said when the room remembered how to breathe. "Did you attempt to localize that whistle?" "Yes," Klein said. "We conducted a site survey at Battery Wharf. The loading bay ventilation system produces a periodic whistle with a 14-second cycle. We recorded its spectral signature. It matches the harmonic content heard on the memo to a degree consistent with identity under the environmental conditions that night." "Show the overlay," Levine said. "Exhibit I, a simple, kind graph, the garage whistle's waveform atop the memos. Peaks were old friends." Jurors nodded like people shown two photographs of the same child in different light. "Did you locate a closet adjacent to that vent containing a tarp printed with a contractor logo used by Mr. Vale's company, wedge blocks, and blue shop towels?" Levine asked. "Yes," Klein said. "We also recovered a hair from the tarp later matched to Ms. Doyle." "Objection, hearsay as to the match," Kellner said. "Sustained," Hartnett said. "Jury will disregard the conclusion. The fact of a hair recovered may stand." "Did you recover reflective glass beads embedded in joint compound from the sacristy sink trap and from the Battery Wharf closet consistent with a proprietary wallboard and binder used at Mr. Vale's staging site?" Levine asked. "Yes," Klein said. The lab analyst followed, precise where Klein was broad. He said micron and bead count and brightener signature and made them sound like nouns a child could trust. Then came Rourke. The side door opened, and he walked to the stand as if gravity had been turned up one notch just for him. He glanced at the gallery where no one had brought him. He looked at Vale and then shut his eyes as if that might keep a tide from rolling in. His lawyer had the cautious eyes of a man holding a kite in gusty weather. "State your name," Levine said. "Paul Francis Rourke. You worked maintenance for St. Cormac's and for Battery Wharf." "Yes." She walked him through the van, the keys, the closet, the vent. Then, "Who told you to stop the girl?" "Marina Cobb," he said. "She said no bruises on the face." "And who told her?" He swallowed. "Ethan Vale." A murmur went through the gallery and bounced against Hartnett's bench like a ball against a school wall. "Describe the night," Levine said. Rourke recited it like a man finally reading a meter correctly. The figure eight of the steps, the tarp dragged, the chocks kicked, Lino Barberi's panic, the fall, the silence that is not silence but a machine's breath. "I carried the phone," he said. "I hid it where the priest would find it." He said Adorimus like a child copying a foreign alphabet. Kellner rose for cross with a smile sharpened to a point. "Mr. Rourke, you have made a deal with the Commonwealth." "I have," Rourke said. "You expect consideration on your charges." "I expect truth to be cheaper than lies," Rourke said, sweating. "You hate my client," Kellner said mildly. "I don't hate him," Rourke said. "I hate the corridors he builds for people like me. You told the story after police found your towel, and your beads, and your keys, and your van glittering like a Christmas ornament." "Yes," Rourke said. "I told it when I understood I had to. And you say you placed a phone behind a church wall out of conscience." "Yes," he said, the word leaving his mouth like a coin he couldn't afford. Kellner let disdain do a small pirouette. "No further questions." Barberi came next, counsel holding his elbow as if to keep him from dashing into traffic. He confessed to panic. He did not confess to intent. He said shove and wrong angle, and I thought it would be fine, and the jury's faces did the thing faces do when they encounter a man who has never had to narrate consequence before. Cobb followed, lacquered calm fissured by the ledger on the screen behind her. Levine walked her through the emergency repairs rows, the timestamps, the pings from the building repeater logs, the stop the girl text. Cobb's attorney objected at each ungenerous verb and was sustained on 2 and overruled on 3. Cobb kept her voice even until Levine said, "Teach humility." And then something like heat rose under her cheekbones. "It's a phrase," Cobb said. "A concept." "It's an instruction," Levine said. "To whom was it given?" Cobb looked at Vale and then at the judge and then at the carpet where many reputations had come to rest. "It came from Mr. Vale," she said, as if the carpet had demanded tribute. Finally, because theater understands finale, the Commonwealth called Ethan Vale. Objection, Kellner said immediately. We will advise our client to assert his Fifth Amendment privilege. Noted, Hartnett said. She looked at Vale. Mr. Vale, you may take the stand to assert your privilege as to specific questions, or you may remain seated. The jury will be instructed accordingly. Kellner conferred in a hiss. Vale stared in the direction of the jury box as if trying to replace the 12 with a view of his newest model. He stayed seated. Levine read the repeater logs aloud anyway, letting the time codes do their slow, honest work. 1104, plate read. 1106, voice memo says your first name. 1109, device pings near the loading bay. 1119, your agent texts, is it done? 1120, reply handled. 1157, Rourke's van leaves. 213, Father Quinn's keycard ping. She folded the page. No more questions for the witness who isn't. Hartnett broke for the day with a gavel tap that sounded heavier than wood. The jurors stood and filed, still neutral, still rented. Reporters exhaled en masse, like a flock. In the moment between standing and leaving, the courtroom air changed. Not colder exactly, just less obedient. The AC hiccuped. A vent banged once in the duct above the jury box, the kind of heat knock old buildings produce when air decides to remember it lives in metal. People shivered for reasons that would be bad testimony and good radio. Hartnett looked at the ceiling with the tolerance of a woman who has long since stopped attributing metaphysics to facilities. Tell maintenance to stop chasing metaphors, she said dryly. A ripple of laughter, thready but grateful, warmed the room back to temperature. Maeve tucked her pen behind her ear and stood. She caught Quinn's eye where he sat at the aisle's end. He gave the smallest nod, a benediction for a day when verbs had done more work than nouns. Outside, on the granite steps, the wind came in off the harbor with its old iodine breath. The cameras were waiting. They always are. Maeve slipped past them into a strip of shadow where microphones don't follow. The city hummed with the pleasure it takes in its own scandals. The case's spine felt set. Tomorrow would be summations, maybe a verdict the day after or the day after that. The office lights would burn late. The vent in the wharf would keep its 14-second hymn, indifferent. And somewhere a phone, bagged and quiet, would rest under a number in evidence, having done its last human kindness. Part 11, Confession Without Seal. Rourke pled in the anteroom because shame prefers carpets to microphones. The paperwork made a dry, practical sound as he signed. Manslaughter, cooperation, the long grammar of remorse reduced to columns. He didn't look larger for it. If anything, the subtraction of defiance made him ordinary. Every building's man in a plain shirt who finally decided the truth was cheaper than lies. Say it clean, the ADA told him. I held her while Cobb taped, he said. We meant to scare, not to. The unfinished part stood between them like furniture you learn to walk around in the dark. He initialed each page. Somewhere down the hall, a copier produced the fragile snow of a bureaucracy at work. Cobb flipped separately, in a conference room with water bottles and a view of a courthouse corner where pigeons practiced indifference. Cooperation agreements dressed themselves as arithmetic, counts dismissed here, exposure reduced there, but there's always a moral remainder. She read the indictment draft with her face in neutral and said, finally, I can testify to the message chain. I can testify to cash. I can say where the cameras sleep. Her attorney nodded in the tempo of a man counting billable seconds. She didn't look at Vale when she signed. She looked at the window's reflection of her own lacquered composure and hated it a little. Vale's counsel fought the collapse with the vigor of men accustomed to gravity working on command. But the charges assembled like scaffold. Second-degree murder, witness tampering, conspiracy. The words didn't care how immaculately he'd arranged his life. They only cared about sequence. They were verbs, not reputations. Maeve watched it unfold with the particular fatigue of cops at the end of long proofs. Outcomes were necessary. They were not nourishing. Paper moved. Decisions landed. The city made space in itself for a new public shame and then kept walking. In the hour after court, Father Quinn did something that requires a different kind of stamina. He put on his jacket, an old black thing with a repaired seam at the shoulder, and walked to a third-floor walk-up in Dorchester where Clara Doyle's parents kept a living room clean like an altar. The mother opened the door and went still, as if her body had to ask permission to allow the next moment in. The father rose from a chair that had learned the slant of his grief. Quinn stood in the doorway and put the evidence bag on the small table with the gingerly precision of a man setting down a newborn or a bomb. The phone, scrubbed, copied, returned. "It is yours," he said. "It has done all it can for the court. It may do more for you or nothing. It may simply be a thing to put in a drawer, but it is yours." The mother reached without touching, then drew her hand back to her chest. "She talked into that," she said softly, not as question. "She said his name." "She did," Quinn said, "and people listened." The father, whose eyes had the green-gray of harbor water, looked at the collar, then the bag, then the priest's hands. "Did you hear her?" he asked. Not what she said, but her. Quinn could have said many wrong, easy things. He chose a hard, small one. "I heard what led to what mattered," he said, "and I followed it." He did not offer theology. He offered verbs. They nodded as if that were, if not comfort, then at least a surface they could stand on. When he left, he did what priests do on stoops. He stood a while between weather and house and let the world put its hand on his chest. Then he walked back to the parish by streets that had learned his pace. Maeve wrote her supplemental, the one you write for your own file when you want a future version of yourself to remember what this case taught you and not just what it paid. Priests can be wrong about cause, useful about consequence. She added, buildings talk. Phones listen. People translate. Asterisk asterisk, it looked glib on the page. Felt true in her bones. Rourke's formal allocution in court was a straitjacket of yes. Yes, I did. Yes, I knew. Yes, I accept. Barberry's voice fractured on impact, the way men's voices do when they finally say shove under oath and have to hear what the word becomes. He tried to keep panic out of it. Panic is a poor alibi and an excellent confession. Cobb's testimony moved like a ledger. Clean lines, unemotional entries, the dry confidence of numbers. When Levine asked, who authorized the budget exceptions, Cobb said, "Mr. Vale." With the same tone she would reserve for the contractor delivered the pallet. The jury did not blink. They had been rented for neutrality. They were returning themselves with minimal wear. Maeve found a moment alone in the nave at St. Cormac's that week, not for prayer. Her faith kept its distance, but for quiet. The patch over the niche had cured to a dull, forgiving white. Someone had sanded it smooth and waited for paint. She touched it with the back of her fingers the way you test a child's forehead. Cool, obedient, ordinary. The laminated router sign still said Adormus. The word had begun as a hymn. It had become a breadcrumb. Now it was just a label again, which is one way peace returns to rooms that have had to hold too much. Quinn found her there by instinct. He did not ask for company. He accepted it. "The altar cloth," he said, "will be replaced. Keep the scorch-marked one," Maeve said. "Not on the altar. Somewhere a hand can find it when it needs to remember why we look at walls." He smiled, small. "Detective," he said, as if awarding a quiet honor. "We do not have confession today." "No seal," she said, "but I can offer a statement." He waited. "I prefer routers to visions," she said, "but I also prefer people who move when the air tells them something's wrong." She angled a look his way. "You were useful about consequence." He bowed his head as if at the gospel and then immediately chastised himself for the reflex. "You were good at verbs," he said. "You kept us all away from nouns that lie." By the week's end, Maeve's desk looked briefly empty. One of those tricks paperwork plays when it has only relocated its weight to a courthouse docket. She examined her own ledger. Calls made, warrants served, statements signed, lab reports filed, a note to facilities about the AC hiccup in Judge Hartnett's courtroom that had made everyone briefly superstitious. The ticket came back closed. The technician had found nothing wrong, which of course meant everything was fine. On Friday, the Commonwealth amended the charges to reflect Cobb's cooperation and Rourke's plea. Vale's counsel filed a motion with a title so long it needed footnotes to keep its ego upright. The city continued, as it always does, to add layers to itself like an oyster, nacre on grit. None of this would bring Clara back. Some of it would make the next case easier to prove. That arithmetic is the best the living can do for the living. Maeve took the long way home, across the greenway down to the water. The wind was indecisive, then settled. Battery Wharf looked scrubbed, like evidence that had been told to behave for company. She listened, half expecting the vent to rise into its 14-second hymn. But machines perform on schedule and scorn sentiment. The harbor horn spoke once, as if to sign the air. She turned her collar up and walked, letting the phone in her pocket be only a phone. That night she dreamed of marble and keys and a square of plaster popping free like a tooth. In the dream, a woman's voice did not say a man's first name. It said, "We heard you," and the room became warmer by the width of a hand. Morning came with its stupid mercy. Coffee tasted like something besides paper. The city rattled awake. Maeve flipped her notebook to a fresh page and wrote only the day's date and a line. Prep Quinn for trial testimony. Actions only. Then she closed it and let silence earn its keep. Final part, testimony for the unquiet. Verdicts land with the sound of wood and breath. The foreperson stood, the clerk read, and the words made their careful path across the air. Guilty, second-degree murder, and guilty again for conspiracy and witness tampering. Marina Cobb's charges eased into a narrower corridor in exchange for her ledger and her mouth. Paul Rourke's plea settled around him like a coat he finally agreed fit. In the gallery, a dozen private stories changed shape. Relief, anger, the flat stare of people who had wanted a miracle and got procedure. Judge Hartnett spoke about sequence, consequence, and the city's duty to itself. The stenographer's fingers gave memory a spine. Maeve did not watch Vale's face for remorse. She watched his posture for acknowledgement of gravity. He remained the kind of man who believed lobby marble could absolve a CFO, now forced to sit in a room where verbs have budgets too. When deputies touched his elbows gently, he flinched 1 millimeter. Surprised, perhaps, to discover that custody has a temperature. Outside, Boston resumed its habits. News vans gulped electricity. A columnist rehearsed a lead about faith and fiber optic cable. Tourists photographed the courthouse like a temple where gods had updated their jurisdiction. Maeve threaded the edge of the crowd and let the city reabsorb her. A case is a house you live in for a while. Moving out always leaves dust on your hands. At St. Cormac's, the niche was repainted, flat, forgiving white, and the patch red as just another square in the geometry of quiet. The laminated sign by the router came down. The new network name glowed on a fresh card in Quinn's tidy script. St. Michael. Not a hymn, not a hint, just a sentinel with a sword. The youth group rolled their eyes and entered the new password anyway. The church exhaled back into routine. Baptisms with grandmother camera crews, food pantry lines with the patience of saints, a boiler that sighed in the same old syllables. Quinn found himself in small tasks with large echoes. He walked the nave at dusk and counted the candles to keep his hands from remembering edges of plaster. He called the Doyles, not to minister exactly, but to be furniture that did not move when leaned upon. He folded the Tuesday altar cloth with its scorch scar like a comet and stored it in a drawer not marked by label but by thumbprint. He did not stop at the transept, except when he did, and then only long enough to lay a palm flat on paint and bless the great ordinary. Maeve returned to the church once more at 2 a.m., not for ritual but for measurement. The nave's centerline still listed a hair to the east. Old timbers remember the way a city leans. The boilers hummed on their timer, and the air stayed mild. She paused by the south transept and listened. A pipe ticked, once like a clock deciding to keep working. She noted the time because noting time is a superstition that respectably calls itself method. Her pen made the quietest mark a human hand can make and still exist on paper. "Detective," Quinn said from the aisle, voice pitched low so the building could go on pretending it wasn't listening. "Father," she kept her eyes on the wall. "I came to see if the room kept any drafts. And it keeps only the ones maintenance can fix." He smiled, the kind that uses as few muscles as a vow. Then we are safe on all fronts. She walked him through the sequence again. A coda played under the breath. The keycard, the seam, the towel, the call. It wasn't for him, not really. It was for the part of her that needs the last note to resolve exactly where the first note promised. When they reached the sacristy, she opened the stainless drawer where the parish keeps its ferrule adapters. Old ports, new cords, everything human hands have asked electricity to learn. She let it slide shut. You ever think about how a router is just a kind of bell? She asked, surprising herself. Quinn tipped his head. Summoning by signal. Or warning, Maeve said. Either way, it calls people to a place. The night, as if agreeing, laid a thin hush on Hanover Street. Somewhere a delivery truck shifted weight. Somewhere a barback counted bottles. Somewhere a ventilator in a different building rose into a familiar 14-second hymn, and then quieted as if told to keep it down. Morning made its slow promise at the courthouse steps. Quinn came out with his collar unfastened, the starch giving his throat back to him by degrees. His breath fogged once, a ghost entirely produced by weather. He paused at the top stair, hands at his sides, and let the cold braid itself through his hair like a warning already obeyed. Behind him, an exhausted ADA joked with a clerk about coffee strong enough to swear on. In front of him, a camera crew lost interest and swung toward a councilman 2 stories lower. Maeve stood to the side, hands in her coat, liking the way the granite radiated yesterday's sun even in the blue of early. You did what I asked, she said. Verbs only. I like verbs, Quinn said. They let nouns retire gracefully. They walked down together. On the last step, a gust moved across the stone. Not dramatic, not narrative. Just a hand from the harbor sweeping crumbs into the day. For a half-beat, the air felt touched, the way rooms sometimes feel after the last person leaves. A clean remainder. Maeve did not look up as if expecting approval. She looked forward as if expecting work. Work came. It always does. Reports to archive, training to schedule, a call from a detective in Chelsea about a different kind of wall and a different kind of whisper. Maeve took the call, wrote the name, underlined the verb. She sat in her chair and let her spine learn the angle of the next case. In a drawer, a copy of Clara's memo lived under a paperclip. 45 minutes of machine memory that no one would need again, and that still felt like a heartbeat you keep hearing after the house quiets. Before she left for the day, she walked to evidence to close the loop in ink. The phone, now just an object with a release form attached, had gone home. Chain complete. She wrote a line at the bottom of the log. If a ghost testified, it did so by placing a phone where a hand would find it. The clerk read it and made a small, approving sound. Bureaucracy likes a sentence that minds its verbs. That night, Boston filed another story in brick and light. The harbor horn put a straight line through the fog so even the drunk and the penitent could walk it. Maeve stepped out of the station and into air that did not change temperature for anyone who believed it might. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Somewhere a boiler ticked like a settling heart. Somewhere a woman's parents held a phone in a quiet room and decided whether to listen. Somewhere a priest turned off a light and left a nave to its clean darkness. The city breathed. The case closed. The unquiet, for once, kept its promise. The courtroom is empty now. The lights have cooled. A janitor's cart rolls across the same floor that once carried verdicts and ghosts, and the sound echoes like a slow applause for truth finally spoken aloud. Boston sleeps, or pretends to, but the wind along the harbor still counts the seconds between horn calls, as if keeping time for those who never got to finish their sentence. Every story leaves residue. Plaster dust in a priest's hand, salt on a detective's coat, a word whispered once into a microphone that refused to die. Adoremus, let us adore, not saints, not symbols, but the small mercies that let evidence find its way to the living. This was a deposition for the dead, an investigation into what faith and fact do when forced to share a witness stand. You've been listening to Somnolent Conspiracies, where every shadow leaves an affidavit, and every silence remembers something. Thank you for walking with us through the halls of St. Cormac's, through drafts, verdicts, and voices that refuse to stay buried. If you felt the chill when the choir mic caught that final word, you're exactly where you're meant to be. Stay curious. Stay kind. Keep your lights low and your doubts ready. And as always, every shadow has a story, and we'll be here to tell it. Somnolent Conspiracies. Subscribe, ring the bell, and step quietly into the next case.